The sky was alive with thunder that wasn't weather. Mortars slammed into the sand, shaking the hangar like a beast clawing to get in. Sirens wailed, radios crackled. The air tasted of metal and dust. Mechanics shouted over one another, dragging fuel lines, diving for cover. And then came the call, sharp, desperate, echoing through the static. "Any Apache pilot on base?" Silence. Every wrench froze mid-turn. Faces turned toward the comms, sweat dripping into wide eyes. Somewhere outside, another explosion rattled the earth. For a moment, no one breathed. Then, through the chaos, a single voice cut through it all. "I can fly it." Heads snapped around. The soldier who spent her life fixing the birds had just volunteered to fly one. Would command trust her, or watch everyone die waiting? Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Sergeant Amelia Mia Parker wasn't built for attention. At 5'4", she blended into the blur of uniforms and diesel smoke, her hands always blackened with grease, her hair tucked beneath a sweat-stained cap. Most days, she spoke more to machines than to people. But every bolt she tightened, every turbine she rebuilt, carried the same quiet rhythm, the heartbeat of a promise. Years before, a smaller version of her had sat cross-legged beside an Air Force simulator, watching her father, Captain Daniel Parker, guide the controls with the calm of a man born to fly. He'd let her hold the stick once, guiding her fingers as the horizon leveled across the glowing blue screen. "The sky," he said softly, "is the only place where you can be truly free." When the crash came, engine failure, low altitude, no survivors, that freedom died with him. Mia was 12. At 18, she chased his path straight into flight training, aced every exam, every maneuver, until one number ended it all. 3/4 of a diopter short in her left eye. Disqualified. The rejection letter might as well have been shrapnel. But she didn't quit. "If I can't fly them," she told herself, "I'll keep them alive." And she did. For years, she lived on hangar floors, wrench in one hand, coffee in the other, sweat stinging her eyes under buzzing fluorescent lights. Every engine that roared back to life felt like her father breathing again. Yet after every shift, when the base lights dimmed and footsteps faded, she'd slip behind Bay 4, where an old flight simulator gathered dust. She'd power it up, its ancient fans whining to life, screens flickering ghost blue. There she practiced for hours, tracing invisible skies with calloused hands, whispering to herself the same mantra night after night. "For Dad who flew, so I could dream." Mortars ripped through the dawn sky, shaking every wall of forward operating base Hawk's Nest. The ground trembled beneath the force, sand and metal mixed into a storm of noise and chaos. 2 Apaches lay twisted on the tarmac, black smoke curling into the wind. Only one bird remained untouched, the one Sergeant Amelia Mia Parker had spent all night rebuilding. The hangar lights flickered. Mechanics ducked as another round landed nearby, the air thick with dust and fear. Then the doors burst open. The lieutenant colonel stumbled in, face streaked with soot, voice raw with urgency. "We need air cover. Any Apache pilot on base?" No answer. Just static on the radio and the low moan of wind through the hangar's metal ribs. Mia's eyes locked on the helicopter, her helicopter. She felt the vibration in her bones, the familiar hum of a machine waiting for purpose. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. "Sir," she said, her voice steady, "I can fly it." The words hit the room like gunfire. Wrenches stopped clattering, heads turned. The colonel stared at her as if he hadn't heard right. "You're maintenance crew," he said slowly. "You're not flight certified." She met his eyes. "No, sir. But I know this bird better than anyone here. I built her. I can keep her alive." Outside, another explosion sent a shockwave through the floor. The colonel hesitated, torn between the manual and the moment. The rules said no. The war outside said now. He looked toward the burning horizon, then back at her. His jaw tightened. "Get it airborne, Sergeant," he said, voice low but certain. "That's an order." Mia didn't wait. She grabbed her helmet, sprinted through the dust, and disappeared into the roar of the engines she once only repaired. Mia sprinted through the smoke, her boots pounding against scorched concrete. The air shimmered with heat and dust, sirens wailing above the roar of distant shellfire. Apache 734 loomed ahead, the machine she had rebuilt with her own hands, gleaming beneath the flicker of emergency lights. She climbed onto the stub wing, slid into the cockpit, and moved like someone born for it. Switches, fuel lines, weapon systems. Every motion smooth, certain. She didn't need a checklist. The layout lived in her bones. The smell of hydraulic fluid and burnt metal filled the small cabin as she reached into her pocket, unfolding a weathered photograph. Her father, Captain Daniel Parker, smiling beside a Huey. She taped it above the altimeter. For Dad who flew, so I could dream. Her fingers moved across the console. Auxiliary power on. Turbines spooled up, building into a deep metallic roar. The rotors began to spin, faster and faster until they blurred into a silver halo above her head. The vibration rattled her helmet, but her heartbeat stayed steady. She'd heard this rhythm all her life. It was the sound of purpose. Over the headset came the colonel's voice, tight with disbelief. "Mechanic or not, you're our only air support." Call sign Grease 1. Mia's gloved hand gripped the cyclic, the controls warm beneath her touch. "Copy, Hawk's Nest," she said, voice calm despite the tremor in the air. Grease 1, lifting off. The hangar exploded with wind as the Apache rose, sand swirling in furious circles around it. Mechanics shielded their faces, watching in stunned silence as the woman who once tightened their bolts now carried their hope. The desert sky burned orange above her, a storm of smoke, fire, and glory, as Sergeant Amelia Parker, the mechanic who wasn't supposed to fly, took the heavens in her hands. The rotor beat was a drum inside my chest, a slow, relentless thud that matched the pulse behind my eyes. The desert below was a smear of brown and heat, the horizon a wavering line where smoke and sunlight argued. My hands held the cyclic like a promise, knuckles white beneath the gloves. Every instrument hummed with life. Every warning light was a question I could not yet answer. Breathe in. Breathe out. Let the machine speak and follow. I had the convoy in sight before the targeting symbology painted its pale green boxes on the HUD. 5 vehicles in a ragged line, dust plumes trailing like ragged banners. The lead truck had a heavy mount, the second rolled a taller profile that could mean mortars. They were moving faster than the reports said they would. On the headset, someone who'd been on the ground a second too long swore and chopped the call. "They're breaching the line. 28 men pinned at grid 045 Grease 1, you see 'em?" Locking the Hydra rockets felt like centering my breath. The sight went steady, the cursor thinned, and my finger hovered. Time slowed. I think of Dad in a corner of my head, the way he smiled without showing his teeth when things lined up right. I squeezed once. The rocket left like an angry comet, a white streak that ended in a blossom of orange. The lead vehicle detonated into a sculpture of flame and twisted metal. I felt the bird flex under me like a living thing pleased. Radio erupted into shouts. "Direct hit!" Grease 1, direct hit. You got eyes on the rest? I had them. I came around low and hard, the Apache answering every micro-correction as if we'd practiced this in the dark together. The 30mm spat fire that chewed at the last truck's flank until it rolled and died. For a beat, the world was nothing but the noise of victory and the bright staccato of tracer fire kissing the sand. Men on the ground started cheering through the static, voices rough with relief. "Grease 1, you're saving our boys." I let that rise through me like fuel and pushed for the next pass. Then the scream I'd trained for only in phantom drills, missile lock. The alarm was a thin, rising keening that shoved cold into my spine. My hands moved before my brain finished the sentence. "Countermeasures, hard right, flare dump." The Apache bucked. I watched through the periphery as a white flare arced away and the missile punched at the decoy, detonating in a choking plume 50 meters off our tail. The shockwave rolled through the airframe and made the HUD jitter. Lights flashed amber, then red. Something groaned in the fuselage. "Grease 1, your smoking status?" the colonel demanded, his voice a tight wire. I slid my eyes to the tail instruments. RPMs fluctuated like a wounded heartbeat. A grinding note sang from the tail rotor drive. Shrapnel, small, ugly pieces, had nicked the bearing. I had minutes, maybe. The diagnostics read like a death watch. Command's answer was instant and hard. "Return to base immediately." That's an order. No one ever talks about the anatomy of defiance. It is quieter than people expect. It is not a shout so much as a small, stubborn sound that grows teeth. My reply came thin and steady. "Negative, sir." "If I don't finish this, those men will die." Static crinkled. I could hear the weight of 1,000 regulations pressing through the line, but outside, the convoy was straightening and beginning to pull away. I did the math in a single breath and decided that rules were for when everything is working. This was not one of those times. I made one more run. The bird shuddered under each command as the tail fight slowly surrendered sensitivity. I lined up as best I could, brought the HUD steady, and let the chain gun chew a suppressing corridor while the rockets finished the stubborn targets. 2 more strikes, 2 more detonations, dust pillars where engines used to be. The radio erupted like a choir of saved men. "Contact broken. They're falling back." Grease 1 broke the convoy. The ride home was a prayer in small, precise motions. Every correction demanded more force. Every rudder input felt like levering against friction. The tail warnings turned from orange to a steady red blink. I kept the speed low, kept the nose up, and made the machine do the work we could both still do. The desert rolled beneath us, and the base swelled into a patchwork of tents and burned scrub. I cut down the glide as smooth as I could manage, but the bird did not want to kiss the earth gently. We hit hard enough to jolt my teeth. The skids bounced, the frame shrieked, and then the Apache settled with a cough and a slow spin down. For a suspended second, there was no sound but the ringing in my ears. Then the hangar doors opened like a release, and the base threw itself forward in one thunderclap of noise. Cheers, curses, shouts, boots pounding. Men ran, some crying, some laughing, some just stumbling toward the metal that had brought them back. The colonel came up the line, chest heaving, face unreadable under dust. He stopped in front of me, every second stretched thin. He could have said anything. Instead, he looked straight at me, and his hand snapped up with the precision of a man who'd learned to measure consequence. He saluted. Around us, the chant rose and swelled. "Grease 1. Grease 1. I let the adrenaline bleed out of my limbs and listened to the sounds of people who had been pulled back from a verge. My mouth tasted like smoke and dust and a memory of my father's coffee. I thumbed the photo in my pocket without thinking and whispered, just under breath, "We did it." The colonel was the first to reach her. The rotors were still winding down when his shadow fell across the cockpit. His eyes gave nothing away, no anger, no relief, just the unreadable weight of command. She slid from the ladder, boots hitting the ground hard enough to jolt through her knees. He stood close enough for her to see the soot streaking his jaw. "Sergeant Parker," he said, voice flat, every syllable clipped by discipline, "you violated a direct order." A breath's worth of silence stretched between them, the whole base listening. Then his tone changed, quieter but cutting through the noise. "And you saved 44 lives." He saluted. For a moment she couldn't move. Then the sound built, a roar rising from the crowd of soldiers, mechanics, medics. "Grease 1, Grease 1, they shouted until the air itself shook. She only nodded once, too exhausted to smile. By sunrise, the reports were already climbing the chain of command. Within days, Pentagon lawyers and investigators arrived, asking the same questions from every angle. They wanted to know how a maintenance sergeant had flown an Apache into combat. They played her helmet cam footage in a sterile briefing room, rewound it, slowed it, studied every maneuver. One veteran pilot, gray at the temples, leaned back after the recording ended. His voice was low but certain. "She flew like someone who's been doing it for years," he said. That tail rotor recovery, textbook under pressure. Weeks later, the verdict came. No punishment. No reprimand. Instead, a citation for valor and an honorary pilot designation call sign, Grease 1, entered into the official Army record. When they handed her the document, the colonel who'd once doubted her met her eyes again. "Sergeant Parker," he said, letting the words settle like a medal in the air, "your father would have been proud." She swallowed the lump in her throat and managed a single reply. "Thank you, sir." Outside the windows, the sun caught the fading smoke on the horizon. For the first time since the attack, the sky looked wide enough to breathe in. 6 months later, the war zone had become a classroom. The sound of explosions had been replaced by the hum of ceiling fans and the occasional creak of old desks. At Fort Rucker, Alabama, Sergeant Amelia "Mia" Parker stood at the front of a room filled with young mechanics, faces fresh, eyes wide, hands still unscarred by years of oil and grit. On the whiteboard behind her, diagrams of rotor assemblies and flight protocols filled the space. But today's lesson wasn't about torque limits or engine cycles. Today was about something heavier. "Rules keep us alive," she said, her voice steady but warm. "But when chaos hits and the book runs out of answers, that's when character decides who stands up." A ripple of silence followed. One trainee, barely 20, lifted his hand, eyes uncertain. "Sergeant," he asked, "what if we stand up and we fail?" Mia paused, the question sinking deep. Then she smiled, the kind of quiet smile that comes from having already seen the worst and lived through it. "Then you fail," she said softly. "But at least you tried. The only thing worse than failure is watching others fall because you were too afraid to move." The class didn't speak for a moment. The air felt heavier, as if every student understood that her words weren't theory. They were survival. At the back of the room, Lieutenant Colonel Whitman watched in silence. The same man who had once ordered her into the sky now ran the new Emergency Flight Operations Program, designed to train mechanics for crisis flight readiness. He'd admitted to her once, over bad coffee and better memories, "When I told you to fly that day, Parker, I thought I was signing your death sentence." She'd smiled then, the same as now, and said, "So did I, sir." Now, as the class filed out, Whitman met her eyes across the room. No words, just a small, solemn salute, the kind shared between two people who had both gambled everything and won something greater than medals: understanding. Outside, the wind carried the faint thrum of distant rotor blades. Mia looked up instinctively, a mechanic's reflex mixed with a pilot's longing. The sky still belonged to her. The late afternoon light spilled through the hallway at Fort Rucker, painting the polished floor in gold. The camera moved slowly, almost reverently, across a glass display case set into the wall. Inside were 2 flight badges, one tarnished, one gleaming. The first, Captain D. Parker, fly safe. The second, Sergeant A. Parker, Grease 1. Between them rested a faded photograph of a man and his daughter beside an old Huey, both smiling into a sun long gone. Beneath the display, etched into a brass plaque, were 7 simple words that carried the weight of everything she had lived for. She fixed the bird, then flew it. The camera lingered there, the quiet hum of distant rotor blades echoing through the hall. Then the narrator's voice lowered, calm and proud. "Heroes aren't always the ones with wings. Sometimes they're the ones who built them." A whisper, almost lost in the stillness. "We're flying, Dad." We're finally flying. If you believe courage means stepping up when no one else will, salute in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Military Veteran Stories for more real tales of valor, sacrifice, and heart. Because some stories deserve to be saluted.